The sun hung low over the rugged landscape, casting long shadows across the desert floor, yet her world was darker than any shadow could reach. Every step she took felt heavy, not from the sand beneath her feet, but from the weight of the grief she carried. Her body ached, her heart ached, and the wound within her soul seemed impossible to soothe. She had endured loss after loss, some visible, others invisible, and now it felt as though the entire world had abandoned her. She stumbled to a small clearing near a creek, the water reflecting the dimming sky, a fragile mirror of the peace she so desperately sought but could not find. The tears she had tried to hold back spilled freely. She sank to the ground, clutching her knees to her chest as if she could somehow hold herself together. "It hurts too much," she whispered to the wind, her voice trembling with the rawness of her emotions. The words felt both like a confession and a surrender. She had tried to be strong, to fight through the pain alone, but now, finally, the truth came spilling out. She could not bear it by herself. That it was then that he appeared, silent and steady, moving with a kind of quiet confidence that seemed to belong to the earth itself. The Apache warrior had noticed her from a distance, recognizing the unmistakable signs of a soul in torment. He did not speak immediately. He did not offer empty platitudes or try to rush her through the pain. Instead, he simply approached, his presence calm and unwavering. There was a sense of safety in the way he carried himself, a silent promise that she was no longer alone. She flinched at his nearness at first, her heart clenching with distrust and fear. People had failed her before. Some had hurt her, others had walked away when she needed them most. Yet something in his gaze, a steady, patient, and unjudging look, softened the walls she had built around herself. She wanted to recoil, yet a small, almost imperceptible part of her longed for the comfort he offered without demand. He crouched down beside her, close enough to offer warmth but careful not to invade her space. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the faint scent of the creek, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she noticed the world outside her pain. He extended a hand, not to touch her forcefully, but to simply let her know he was there. "I'm here," he said quietly, his voice steady like a promise. "I'm here to hold you until it no longer does." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that no other words ever had. There was no judgment, no expectation, only the unwavering offer of support. For a long while she said nothing. She could not yet trust the gentleness, could not yet believe that someone could bear witness to her suffering without using it against her. But as she felt the warmth of his presence, a small shift occurred. The ache in her chest, though still present, began to find some relief in knowing she was not facing it alone. Slowly, tentatively, she allowed herself to lean toward him, not fully, but enough to feel the safety he represented. In that moment, pain and comfort coexisted. Her tears continued to fall, but they were met with steadiness rather than dismissal. For the first time in a long while, she realized that healing did not begin by erasing the pain, but by allowing someone to share it with her. And so, beneath the fading light of the desert sky, the first threads of trust and relief began to weave themselves into her broken heart, marking the beginning of a journey she had once thought impossible, a journey toward healing, with someone beside her to hold her until the hurt no longer controlled her. The night settled over the desert like a soft, dark blanket, and with it came a stillness that both comforted and unnerved her. Stars sprinkled the sky, distant and cold, yet they seemed to reflect the small flicker of hope growing inside her. She had spent hours sitting by the creek, letting the water's gentle flow wash over her raw emotions, and all the while the Apache warrior had remained near. He did not speak much. Words had little power here, but his presence was steady, an unspoken promise that she was not alone. She found herself watching him out of the corner of her eye, noting the way his movements were deliberate yet effortless. Every step he took, every gesture he made, carried a quiet strength that seemed to demand nothing yet gave everything. There was no rush, no pressure, just an invitation to let herself feel, to let herself grieve, to let herself lean. And gradually she realized that leaning did not mean weakness. It meant survival, a testament to the resilience she had forgotten she possessed. I don't know how to do this," she whispered, voice barely audible above the creek's soft murmur. "How to feel pain and not be swallowed by it." Her hand shook as she reached toward her knees, tugging at the frayed edges of her clothing, a nervous habit she had carried through so many lonely nights. He moved closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance, yet close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His eyes met hers with unwavering attention, not pity, not judgment, but pure acknowledgement. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly. "Pain isn't something you conquer by yourself. Let me be here with you." The simplicity of his words struck her like a revelation. She had spent so long believing that strength meant isolation, that survival demanded enduring every hurt silently. And yet, here was someone who refused to turn away, someone willing to carry the weight of her suffering without expecting repayment or gratitude. She felt a tear escape and streak down her cheek, and this time she did not wipe it away. Instead, she let it fall freely, trusting, somehow, that it would not be met with scorn or impatience. Slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to lean toward him. The movement was hesitant, as if testing the waters of trust, but he did not flinch or push her away. Instead, he adjusted, allowing her to rest against him, not forcing closeness but offering it willingly. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, the tight knot in her chest loosening ever so slightly. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt a flicker of safety, a quiet relief that whispered, "You are not alone." Minutes stretched into hours, marked only by the gentle rustle of the creek and the occasional sigh that escaped her lips. Words were unnecessary. Silence had become their shared language. In that silence, she discovered something remarkable, that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that pain could be softened by presence, and that trust, once broken, could slowly be rebuilt. As the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the desert in soft shades of pink and gold, she lifted her head slightly, meeting his gaze. There was a quiet understanding there, a mutual recognition of the fragile bond forming between them. "Thank you," she whispered, almost more to herself than to him, for the act of being held, for the permission to feel, for the promise that she was no longer facing the night alone. And in that delicate moment, with the world awakening around them and the creek singing its eternal song, she felt the first real stirrings of hope. It was not a sudden, miraculous healing, nor a dramatic erasure of pain, but a gentle, profound truth that even the deepest hurt could be lightened when shared, and that the journey toward healing could begin with the simple, steadfast act of someone being willing to hold you until it no longer hurts. The sun had risen fully now, spilling golden light across the desert, yet her heart still felt tethered to shadows of the past. The night had offered a brief respite, a sanctuary of shared silence and gentle presence, but daylight brought with it memories she could not escape. Faces, voices, regrets, they pressed upon her relentlessly, a tide of sorrow she had learned to carry alone. And yet, for the first time, she felt the courage to confront them, not as a solitary prisoner of grief, but with someone beside her who would not let her fall. She rose slowly, brushing sand from her clothes, though the movement felt heavy, almost unnatural. The Apache warrior stood a short distance away, watching with the same steady patience he had maintained through the night. There was no rush in his gaze, no demand for her to perform or to heal on his schedule. It was a look that said, "Take your time. I am here." That simple assurance anchored her, and she felt a tiny spark of strength ignite within her chest. "I can't stop thinking about it," she confessed, her voice low, almost hesitant, as if speaking aloud made the pain more tangible. "The mistakes, the losses, all of it." Her hands trembled slightly as she traced patterns in the sand, a nervous habit that had stayed with her since childhood. "I've tried to forget. I've tried to move on, but it keeps coming back." He approached slowly, kneeling beside her without speaking. His presence was deliberate, calm, a silent signal that she was not alone in facing these memories. "You don't have to forget," he said quietly. "You only need to carry it with someone who will help you bear it. Let me be that someone." The words were strange in their simplicity. They offered no promises of erasure, no assurances that the past would vanish. Instead, they offered something far rarer, a willingness to share the burden, to allow her to confront her pain without fear of judgment or abandonment. Her chest tightened as the reality of that gesture sank in. For so long, she had believed that strength meant isolation, that healing was a solitary endeavor. Now, she realized that true strength could also mean allowing oneself to lean, to trust, to let someone else carry part of the weight. Tentatively, she turned toward him, her body seeking the comfort she had learned to deny herself. He met her halfway, not forcing closeness but allowing her to find her own space within his steadfast presence. Slowly, she rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the tension in her body begin to ebb, if only slightly. The warmth of his presence was a quiet reassurance, a physical manifestation of the trust she was beginning to rebuild. Hours passed in a rhythm of shared silence and unspoken understanding. She spoke sparingly, recounting fragments of memories, letting him hear pieces of the sorrow she had bottled up for years. And he listened, truly listened, without interruption, without judgment. In his eyes, she found validation for her pain, a reflection of her humanity rather than a critique of her weakness. By mid-afternoon, a subtle transformation had begun. Her tears, though still present, no longer carried the sharp edge of despair. Instead, they became a release, a cleansing of the grief that had clung to her for so long. For the first time, she understood that healing was not about erasing the past, but about learning to carry it with support, to allow pain and comfort to coexist. As the sun traced its arc across the sky, she lifted her head and met his gaze. There was a quiet understanding there, a shared acknowledgement of the progress she had made. She whispered a small, tentative thank you, and though it was not a declaration of complete healing, it was a promise to herself that she would continue to face her pain no longer alone, and that she would allow the Apache warrior, this steady presence, who had become her anchor, to hold her through it all. In that moment, the desert, the creek, the wind, they all seemed to pause in gentle recognition. Pain had not vanished, but the fear of it had lessened. And the journey toward healing, once unimaginable, had truly begun. The evening sky began to dim again, the horizon painted in soft shades of crimson and violet. The day had passed slowly, but not without meaning. She had spoken more in those few hours than she had in months. Small confessions, broken fragments of memories, and moments she had once vowed never to share with anyone. And yet, with him, the words seemed to come like water breaking free from a cracked dam. Still, there were things she had not said, secrets buried deep within her heart, memories so painful she could hardly breathe when they surfaced. As she sat by the fire he had built, its flames warm against the cool desert night, she felt the weight of those unspoken truths pressing on her chest. The firelight flickered in her eyes, reflecting both her hesitation and her need. The Apache warrior sat across from her, calm and steady, his gaze never forcing hers but always open. He sharpened a piece of wood with his knife, not as a distraction, but as a way of showing her that she had time. Time to choose, time to speak, time to heal. His silence was not empty. It was full of patience, full of permission. She clenched her hands together, knuckles whitening. "There's more," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Things I've never told anyone." "Things I can barely admit to myself." Her breath caught and she lowered her head, ashamed of the vulnerability rising in her chest. The knife paused in his hand, though his expression remained calm. He set the wood aside, giving her his full attention. "When you are ready," he said, voice low like the rumble of the earth itself. "Not before. I will be here either way." The gentleness of that answer broke something inside her. She had expected pressure, a demand for her pain to be spilled out, dissected, and explained. Instead, she found only understanding. Tears welled in her eyes, and before she could stop them, they fell freely, running down her cheeks like rivers too long dammed. "It wasn't just the losses," she admitted through the tears. "It was the way people looked at me afterward. Like I was broken. Like I wasn't worth holding on to anymore. They left, every single one of them. And I believed it was my fault, that I was too much pain for anyone to want." Her voice cracked at the end, the rawness of the confession tearing through her. The Apache leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady, his body grounded as if he carried the weight of the earth itself. "Pain does not make you unworthy," he said. "It makes you human. Those who walked away did not leave because of your pain. They left because of their own weakness." Her breath caught at his words. They were unlike anything she had ever heard before. Not comfort meant to distract, not false hope meant to soothe. They were truth, spoken with conviction, like stone pillars that could not be shaken. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her suffering was not proof of weakness but of strength. He reached out, not to pull her but to offer. His hand hovered near hers, waiting. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her trembling hand in his. The warmth of his touch spread through her like fire against the night chill, grounding her, reminding her that she was still alive, still capable of being held. "I thought I was beyond saving," she whispered, her voice fragile but stronger than before. "You were never lost," he replied firmly. "Only waiting for someone to walk beside you." The fire crackled between them, its glow illuminating their faces as silence fell again, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of two souls finding comfort in each other's presence. She leaned closer, allowing herself to rest against him, her tears soaking into his shoulder. But this time, the tears were different. They were not just of grief, but of release. The desert night stretched on, but within its vastness, a bond had formed. A bond built not on pity, but on shared strength, patience, and the simple act of being there when it hurt too much to stand alone. And for the first time, she began to believe that healing was not a distant dream, but a path she was already walking with him beside her. The next morning dawned with a quiet stillness, the kind of silence that comes after a storm. For her, the storm had been years long, a relentless downpour of grief and loneliness. Yet as she woke near the embers of the fire, with the creek's steady murmur in the background, she realized something had shifted within her. The ache was still there. Grief did not vanish overnight, but it was softer, less suffocating. She could breathe again. The Apache warrior was already awake, tending to the fire with calm precision. His movements were steady, deliberate, almost meditative. She watched him for a moment, realizing that his quiet strength was not only a comfort but an example. He lived in harmony with the land, with silence, with pain itself, as if all were natural parts of life. And in his presence, she began to believe she could do the same. When he noticed her stirring, he offered her water without a word. She accepted, drinking slowly, then whispered, "I feel." Lighter. Her voice was uncertain, as though she doubted her own words. He nodded, his gaze warm but steady. "Because you no longer carry it alone," he said simply. The truth of that pierced her. She had grown used to believing she was destined to walk her path isolated, burdened, unseen. But now, sitting in the desert morning light with someone who had chosen to stay, she realized the smallest shift in perspective could feel like a miracle. Later, as they walked together along the creek, he spoke of the land, of how the desert appeared harsh but was alive with resilience. "The cactus blooms even in the hottest sun," he said, running his hand along the spiny plant without fear. "It is not weak for having thorns. It is strong because it learned to protect its heart." She listened, his words striking deeper than she expected. For the first time, she began to see her own pain differently. Maybe the scars she carried, the defenses she had built, were not marks of weakness after all. Maybe they were proof of her survival. "I used to think I was broken," she admitted quietly, her eyes fixed on the ground as they walked. "But maybe I'm just scarred. And maybe scars aren't the end of the story." He looked at her then, his eyes unwavering. "Scars are stories of endurance. They mean you lived through what tried to end you." Her throat tightened. But this time the tears that formed were not only of sorrow, they carried something gentler, a fragile sense of pride. For the first time, she could see herself not as a victim but as someone who had survived Dodd as the day stretched on. She found herself laughing just once, at something small and simple. The way he tried to show her how to balance a stone on another by the creek and failed, his stoic composure breaking with the smallest smirk. The sound of her own laughter startled her, so foreign it felt like it belonged to someone else. Yet the Apache looked at her as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You see?" he said softly. "Even in pain, there is room for joy. You only needed to be reminded it still lives within you." That night, as they sat once more by the fire, she realized she was no longer thinking only of her suffering. She was noticing the stars, the warmth of the flames, the steadiness of his presence. Pain had not disappeared, but it was no longer all-consuming. A fragile balance had begun to take root, and in that fragile balance, she felt the first true stirrings of strength returning, not the kind of strength that demanded she carry everything alone, but the strength that came from allowing herself to be held until she could stand again. The days that followed were different. For the first time in what felt like forever, she woke not with dread, but with a fragile sense of possibility. Her heart still carried wounds, but they no longer dictated every breath, every step. It was as if his steady presence had carved out space inside her chest where hope could breathe. Again, the Apache warrior encouraged her gently, not with commands or pressure, but with quiet invitations to live again. He showed her how to gather wood, how to feel the direction of the wind, how to listen to the earth beneath her feet. At first, she hesitated, afraid she would fail, afraid her body and spirit were too weary. But his calm assurance made her try, and with each small task, she felt a spark of strength returning. One afternoon, as they walked further from the creek than she had dared before, a wave of fear suddenly gripped her. The landscape stretched endlessly before her, vast and intimidating. Memories of abandonment surged, moments when others had walked away, when she had been left to face her pain alone. Her chest tightened, her breaths came sharp and uneven, and she froze. "It's too much," she whispered, her voice breaking. The fear of falling back into the darkness threatened to overwhelm her. He stopped immediately, turning to her with calm, steady eyes. "Look at me," he said gently. She lifted her gaze, and in his expression she found no impatience, no disappointment, only a grounded strength that seemed to hold her panic at bay. "You are not where you were before," he continued. "You are not alone. If you cannot walk further today, then we rest. If you stumble, I will steady you. The earth does not ask you to conquer it all at once. It asks only that you take one step at a time." His words anchored her. Slowly, she unclenched her fists, breathing deeper. She took a tentative step forward, then another. He walked beside her, not pushing, not pulling, simply there. And though her fear still lingered, it no longer ruled her. That evening, back at the fire, she confessed her fear. "Sometimes I think I will never be free of it," she admitted, staring into the flames. "No matter how far I go, it follows me." He poked at the fire thoughtfully before answering. "The shadows do not vanish because the sun rises. They remain, but light makes them smaller. You are learning to bring your own light." The truth of that settled in her chest. Perhaps freedom was not the absence of pain or fear, but the strength to move forward despite them. And perhaps her journey was not about outrunning the shadows, but about learning how to live with them without being swallowed whole as the fire crackled. She leaned closer to him, allowing her body to rest against his once more. His arm shifted slightly, wrapping around her in a gesture that was both protective and gentle. She closed her eyes, realizing she no longer felt the same crushing weight she once did. The fear would come again, she knew that, but now she had someone who would hold her steady until it passed. In that moment, she understood something profound. Healing was not a straight path, nor was it a final destination. It was a series of moments of breaking, moments of holding, moments of learning to walk again even when her knees shook. And she was not walking alone anymore. The night stretched on, the desert stars brilliant above them. She whispered softly, almost like a vow, "I think I'm learning how to live again." And with quiet certainty, he replied, "Yes, and each day you will grow stronger." The days of quiet living by the creek had given her a fragile rhythm, a balance between silence, small tasks, and the comfort of his steady presence. She had begun to laugh more, to notice the colors in the desert sky, to allow hope into places where despair had long lived. Yet healing, she was learning, was not a straight climb upward. It was a winding path, one that sometimes led back into the shadows she thought she had left behind. That truth came one afternoon when they ventured further into the desert to gather herbs and water. The path was unfamiliar, but his calm footsteps guided her. She walked with growing confidence until the sound of distant voices drifted through the still air. Travelers. Her heart lurched. Fear clawed at her chest as memories of past betrayals surged, the voices of people who had abandoned her, judged her, broken her spirit. Her breaths quickened, her body stiffened. The travelers were not close, but their laughter and tone carried reminders sharp enough to slice through her fragile calm. "It's them," she whispered, though she knew it wasn't. Her voice trembled as she wrapped her arms tightly around herself. "Not the same people, but it feels the same. I can't." Before panic could fully take her, the Apache warrior placed himself gently between her and the direction of the voices. He didn't raise his weapon, didn't react with alarm. Instead, his body became a shield, not just from danger, but from her fear. His hand, warm and steady, touched her shoulder. "They are strangers," he said softly. "Their voices belong to them, not to your past. Breathe. You are here, not there. And I am with you." She tried to focus on his words, but her chest felt like it was caving in. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "But it hurts. It feels like I'm right back where I was, abandoned, unseen, unwanted." His gaze was steady, grounding her. "You are not unseen. I see you. You are not unwanted. I am here. And you are not abandoned. You are standing right now, with me." Something about the way he said it, so firm, so certain, anchored her trembling spirit. She clung to his words, repeating them silently in her mind until the panic began to ease. Slowly, the voices faded into the distance, leaving only the desert wind and the sound of her own unsteady breaths. She collapsed onto a nearby rock, covering her face with her hands. Shame burned in her chest. "I thought I was stronger. I thought I was moving forward. And then just like that, I broke again." He crouched in front of her, waiting until she looked at him. "Strength is not never breaking," he said. "It is learning how to rise each time you do. Today you did not fall alone. You let me hold you through it. That is strength." His words broke the shame that had begun to smother her. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were softer this time, not only of fear but of release. She reached out, and he caught her hand without hesitation, holding it firmly as if it were the most natural act in the world. As they walked back to the creek together, she realized that healing wasn't about never being reminded of pain. It was about learning that when the reminders came, she didn't have to face them alone. His presence had become more than comfort. It was a shield, a grounding force, a reminder that the past no longer had the power to define her. That night, beneath a blanket of stars, she whispered into the quiet, "I thought I'd always be broken. But maybe I'm just learning how to be whole again." The Apache, his arm steady around her shoulders, murmured back, "Not learning alone. Learning with me." And for the first time, she believed it. The days after her moment of panic became strangely brighter. It was as if something had shifted inside her, a layer of fear peeled back, leaving room for something new. The Apache's words lingered. Strength is not never breaking. It is learning how to rise. She carried those words like a talisman, repeating them when old shadows tried to return. By the creek, she began to move with a different kind of purpose. Instead of simply following him, she asked questions about the plants he gathered, the markings on the stones, the way the stars mapped the night. At first, her questions were hesitant, but he answered everyone with patience. "This root heals fever," he explained one morning, crushing it gently between his fingers so she could smell its sharp, earthy scent. She leaned closer, curiosity replacing fear. "And this one?" she asked, pointing to a smaller plant at his feet. A faint smile touched his lips. "That one poisons if you're careless. Teaches us to see, not just look." Her eyes widened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt alive, not just surviving, but learning, expanding, becoming. The Apache watched her with quiet pride. Where once he had seen only trembling hands and hollow eyes, now he saw light returning like fire coaxed back into coals. He did not push her, did not demand she become someone different overnight. Instead, he offered space for her to discover who she already was. One evening, she surprised even herself. As they sat by the fire, she whispered, "I don't know who I am without the pain. It's been so much a part of me. But now I wonder if there's something else beneath it." He turned toward her, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "There is," he said with certainty. "Pain can shape us, but it does not define us. Who you are is still waiting. And she is strong." The words hit her like water after a long drought. She closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that she was more than her scars, more than her past. In the days that followed, she began to claim small acts of identity. She braided her hair differently, weaving flowers she had picked by the creek into it. She sang softly to herself while working, at first in broken whispers, then with growing strength. She asked him to teach her how to weave baskets, and though her fingers fumbled clumsily, her laughter at her mistakes was free and unashamed. Each act was small, but together they became a declaration. "I am still here. I am still becoming." The Apache noticed. He did not tell her what she was turning into, for he knew that discovery belonged to her alone. But he stood close enough to catch her when she stumbled, and he listened when she spoke of her fears. One night, as they sat beneath a sky scattered with stars, she confessed, "When I was broken, I thought all I could be was a shadow of myself. But now, I want to know what it means to live." He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Then live," he said simply, "and I will walk beside you as you learn." Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow, but of something new, something lighter. For the first time, she felt like the pain wasn't her whole story. There was more waiting, and she wasn't afraid to reach for it. She realized then that healing was not only about leaving behind the hurt. It was about stepping into the unknown, daring to claim joy, identity, and self-worth. And with the Apache's steady hand in hers, the unknown no longer seemed frightening. It seemed full of promise. That night, as she lay down to rest, she whispered to herself, "I am not only what I've endured. I am what I choose to become." And the desert, vast and endless, seemed to echo her truth back to her, carrying it into the stars. The transformation she had begun to feel was fragile but real, like a young sapling pushing through dry earth. For the first time, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her laughter returning in small bursts, her steps less burdened. Yet, as life often does, the desert soon tested her newfound strength that it began with smoke. A thin, dark ribbon twisting into the sky on the horizon. The Apache warrior noticed it first. His eyes narrowed as he studied the rising column. "Riders," he said softly. "Strangers camped where they shouldn't be." Her heart quickened. The older would have hidden behind him, paralyzed by fear of what unknown men could bring. But she felt a stirring within her, an urge not to shrink, but to stand. Still, doubt clawed at her. "What if they come this way?" She whispered. "Then we face them," he replied. His tone was calm, but his hand rested near the knife at his belt. "But you will not face them alone." That reassurance steadied her. Together, they walked closer to the creek, ready for whatever might come. And then, from the bend in the canyon, 3 riders appeared, dusty, loud, their laughter echoing too harshly against the quiet land. The men spotted her first. One sneered, his eyes lingering where they shouldn't. "Well, well," he drawled. "Didn't expect to find a woman out here in Apache land." The warrior stepped forward, his body a shield, his presence commanding. But before he could speak, she surprised herself by stepping up beside him. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger. "This land is not yours," she said. "Pass through and leave us in peace." The men laughed, mocking her courage. Yet something in her tone carried weight. It wasn't the voice of the broken woman she had been, it was the voice of someone reclaiming herself. One rider muttered, "Feisty little thing," reaching toward his saddle as though to provoke. But the Apache's knife glinted in the sun, a silent warning. The standoff hung heavy, the desert itself holding its breath. Finally, perhaps sensing the warrior's resolve, or the unexpected fire in the woman's eyes, the riders muttered curses and turned their horses, heading back toward the smoke of their camp. Only when they were gone did her knees weaken. She sank down by the creek, her breath shaking, her hands trembling. "I thought I'd fall apart," she whispered. "But I didn't." The Apache crouched beside her, his gaze filled with pride. "You stood," he said. "Not because I held you, but because you found your own strength." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of triumph, not shame. For the first time, she had faced danger not as a shadow, but as herself whole, steady, unyielding. Later that night, as the fire crackled low, she thought back to her old self, the woman who had flinched at every sound, who had believed she was nothing more than her pain. That woman still lived within her, but now, beside her, walked someone new, someone brave, someone willing to fight for her place in the world. The Apache reached across the flames and took her hand, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. "Your voice carried today," he said. "It carried strength. Remember that when doubt tries to return." She nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. "For the first time, I believe I have a voice worth hearing." The desert seemed to agree, the wind whispering through the canyon like an ancient song of victory. She had been tested, and though fear still lingered, she had not crumbled. She had stood, and in that act, she realized, lay the beginning of true freedom. The desert was quiet that evening, bathed in the fading glow of twilight. The creek shimmered like liquid silver beneath the moon, and the fire crackled low, sending sparks into the dark sky. She sat across from the Apache warrior, her hands resting calmly in her lap. For the first time, she realized she no longer trembled. So much had changed since the day she collapsed in his arms, whispering that the hurt was too much. Pain still lived within her, but it no longer ruled her. The Apache had not erased her suffering, nor claimed to. Instead, he had held her until she discovered the strength to hold herself. That strength had carried her through fear, through trial, through the voices of men who might once have broken her spirit. Now, sitting beneath the stars, she felt something bloom within her that was deeper than survival. It was love not fragile, desperate love born of need, but love rooted in choice, in freedom, in recognition of who she had become. She turned her gaze to him. His face, rugged and strong, was softened by the firelight. His eyes met hers, steady as they had always been, but now she looked at them differently. They were no longer only a refuge. They were a mirror, reflecting the woman she had grown into. "I was lost when you found me," she whispered. "I thought all I could be was pain and shadow. But now, I see myself again. And I see you." The Apache tilted his head, studying her as though weighing the truth in her words. At last he spoke, his voice low and certain. "You were never only pain. You were always more. I did not give you strength. I only reminded you it was yours." Her chest swelled with emotion, tears brimming in her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of love. She moved closer, her hand reaching for his. He took it gently, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I am not asking you to hold me because I'm broken anymore," she said softly. "I ask you to hold me because I want to walk beside you, not as someone you must protect, but as someone who chooses you." A quiet silence followed, filled only by the whisper of the wind and the steady beat of the creek. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her close, not in comfort this time, but in union. "You walk beside me already," he murmured into her hair. "Not as shadow, not as burden, as equal, as heart." Her breath caught, and for the first time in a long, winding journey, she felt wholly alive. The ache that once defined her had loosened its grip, replaced with something fierce and tender hope. That night, beneath the desert sky, she leaned against him, no longer afraid of her reflection in the firelight. She had found herself again, not through forgetting the pain, but through rising beyond it. And in rising she had found him not as a savior, but as a companion, as a partner, as love itself. The stars above seemed brighter than ever. As if the universe bore witness to their bond, she closed her eyes, her voice a whisper against his chest. "It doesn't hurt anymore." And his arms tightened around her as he replied, "Then let us live, not in hurt, but in all that waits beyond it." For the first time, she believed there was no limit to what that beyond could hold.